The pen was still in my hand. Victor Lang sat across the table, perfectly calm. The contract lay open between us. 3 pages. 1 signature line. And 1 clause that would give him 51% ownership of the company. Payroll was due in less than 30 minutes. 43 people were expecting their salaries. And the company account still didn't have enough money to pay them. Outside the glass wall of the lobby, the city kept moving. Cars passed. People walked by with coffee cups. Normal life continuing like nothing was wrong. But inside that room, everything had stopped. Victor leaned back slightly in his chair and watched me. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't impatient. He looked like someone sitting through a meeting that had already been decided. "Time is running out," he said quietly. I didn't look up from the contract. "I'm aware." My phone vibrated again on the table. Another message from Rachel. Operations. She had sent the same message twice already. Payroll processor asking for confirmation. I didn't open it. Victor tapped the contract once with his finger. "The wire is ready," he said. "All you have to do is sign." I looked up at him. "You knew the bank froze our credit line this morning." Victor didn't answer immediately. He simply folded his hands and studied my expression. Then he said something that made my chest tighten. "I pay attention to signals." That's not an answer. It's the only one that matters. But it wasn't. Because there was no way he should have known about the bank. That notice had arrived at 8:30 in the morning. An automated message. Temporary credit suspension pending internal review. No explanation. No warning. And I hadn't told anyone yet. Not the team. Not the board. Not even Daniel, our CFO. Which meant one thing. Someone else had access to that information. Someone inside the company. My phone vibrated again. This time Victor glanced down at it. "Your team seems anxious," he said. "They trust me," I replied. He tilted his head slightly. "That's the interesting part." I frowned. "What does that mean?" Victor leaned forward. "It means they don't know the company almost ran out of money." Anger rose in my chest. "You're enjoying this." "I'm observing it." "You created this situation." "No," he said calmly. "I prepared for it." The difference in wording was deliberate. Prepared. Not created. Which meant something had happened earlier. Something I hadn't fully understood yet. I looked down at the contract again. The equity clause stared back at me. 51%. Control. Everything we had built would belong to him. Not immediately. But effectively. And Victor knew that. "You waited for this moment," I said quietly. He shrugged slightly. "Moments like this always come." My phone vibrated again. I finally picked it up. Another message from Rachel. Bank portal showing restricted status. Is everything okay? My stomach dropped. The bank portal. That meant someone else had seen the freeze. And if Rachel had access to that dashboard, then so did one other person. Daniel. Our CFO. For a moment the room felt smaller. Daniel had joined the company 2 years earlier. Former investment banker. Brilliant with numbers. The one person I trusted completely with the financial side of the business. But that also meant Daniel was the only person who could have seen the credit freeze before anyone else. Victor was watching my face carefully. "You figured something out," he said. "Maybe. Would you like a hint?" I didn't respond. Victor smiled faintly. "Every crisis has a trigger. And every trigger has a beneficiary." I felt a cold realization forming in the back of my mind. Daniel had negotiated our credit facility with the bank. Daniel managed the financial dashboards. Daniel knew our payroll schedule. And Daniel knew Victor. They had worked at the same investment firm years ago. At the time it seemed like a coincidence. Now it felt like something else. "You spoke to Daniel," I said. Victor didn't answer. He simply raised an eyebrow. Which was answer enough. My pulse started to rise. You set this up? Victor shook his head slowly. No. But someone recognized an opportunity. Anger burned in my chest now. You sabotaged the company. Careful, Victor said calmly. That's a strong accusation. I leaned forward across the table. You knew the bank would freeze the credit line. I suspected. You knew payroll was today. Public information inside a company. You knew we wouldn't have enough cash. He smiled again. That was predictable. My phone vibrated again. This time it was a call. Daniel. For a moment I just stared at the screen. Victor noticed the name immediately. Well, he said softly. Speak of the devil. I answered the call. Daniel. His voice sounded tense. Hey, quick question. What is it? The bank portal is showing a restriction flag on the credit facility. I saw that. Do you know why? I glanced at Victor. He was watching the conversation carefully. Still investigating, I said. Daniel hesitated. Okay. Then he asked the question that changed everything. Did Victor contact you? The room went silent. My grip tightened on the phone. Why would you ask that? Another pause. Then Daniel exhaled slowly. Because he called me this morning. My heart started pounding. What did he want? He asked if the company was experiencing a temporary liquidity issue. I felt anger rising again. And you told him? I didn't give details, Daniel said quickly. I just said cash flow was tight this week. Victor was still watching me. Calm. Patient. Like someone listening to a story he already knew. Why would you tell him that? I asked. I thought he might help, Daniel replied. Help. Daniel, he said quietly. Payroll is in 20 minutes. That sentence hung in the air. 20 minutes. Not 30. Not 10. 20. Which meant the situation had moved faster than either of us realized. Listen, Daniel continued. Victor said he might have a bridge solution. I closed my eyes briefly. Yes, I said. He does. Another pause on the line. Good, Daniel said. Because if payroll fails today. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. A company can survive many things. Bad quarters. Lost clients. Failed product launches. But payroll failure destroys trust immediately. Employees stop believing the company will survive. And once that belief disappears, the company usually follows. I ended the call slowly. Victor leaned back again. So, he said. You have confirmation. That you manipulated the situation. That your CFO made a phone call. That's not the same thing. But it created the opportunity. My hands were clenched now. You engineered this. Victor shook his head. I simply arrived when the door opened. I stared at the contract again. The pen was still beside it. 20 minutes until payroll. One signature would solve everything. Employees would be paid. The company would survive. But control would belong to Victor. Not today. Not tomorrow. But soon. And Victor understood something else. Once he owned 51%. Every future decision would belong to him. Hiring. Strategy. Funding. Even my position as CEO. You're buying the company during its weakest moment, I said quietly. He nodded once. That's when assets are cheapest. The blunt honesty of the statement almost made me laugh. Almost. I picked up the pen. Victor's eyes followed the movement. You're making the right decision, he said. Maybe. I looked down at the signature line. Then back at Victor. Before I sign, I said. There's one question. Go ahead. Why tell me about Daniel? Victor's smile widened slightly. Because it changes how you think. How so? Instead of seeing a hostile takeover, you see a rescue. The manipulation was obvious now. If Daniel had contacted him first, then Victor could claim he wasn't the aggressor. He was simply responding to a call. Helping. But that still left one final problem. The contract. I flipped to the last page again. Then I saw something I had missed before. A clause buried near the bottom. Conversion rights triggered by operational instability. Which meant if payroll failed again in the future, Victor's equity would automatically increase. From 51% to 60%, then 70%, and eventually complete control. The realization hit like a punch. This contract doesn't just give you control, I said slowly. It guarantees you the company. Victor didn't deny it. It guarantees stability. For you. For the business. I set the pen back down. Victor frowned slightly. You're hesitating. I'm thinking. You don't have time. Maybe not. My phone vibrated again. Rachel. Operations. I answered. Rachel. Payroll processor is asking for final confirmation, she said. How long do we have? 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Victor leaned forward slightly. Tick-tock. I ended the call. The pen sat on the table. The contract lay open. Victor watched me carefully. Waiting. And suddenly something else occurred to me. Victor had said the wire was ready. But he never proved it. You said the money is ready, I said. It is. Show me. He hesitated for the first time since the meeting began. Just a small pause. But enough. Trust me, he said. No. I leaned back slightly. Show me the transfer authorization. Victor studied my face. You're negotiating. I'm verifying. Another pause. Then he reached into the folder and pulled out his phone. He opened a banking screen and turned it toward me. The number appeared instantly. $120,000. Ready to transfer. Payroll money. But the account name caught my attention. Lang Capital Holdings. Which meant something important. Victor wasn't acting alone. This was a fund. A structured acquisition. A planned takeover. You didn't come here to help, I said quietly. You came to buy. Victor smiled again. That's what investors do. 10 minutes until payroll. 43 employees waiting. A company balanced on one decision. I looked at the contract one final time. Then I picked up the pen. Victor leaned forward slightly. Expectant. I signed my name. But not on the signature line he expected. Instead, I wrote something else. Across the bottom of the page. Victor frowned. What are you doing? I slid the contract back across the table. He read the words slowly. Then his expression changed for the first time. Because instead of signing the agreement, I had written a single sentence. Declined. Victor looked up. You're making a mistake. Maybe. Payroll will fail. Maybe. But the company will still be mine. Victor leaned back again. Studying me. You're bluffing. I stood up from the table. Am I? My phone vibrated again. Rachel. I answered. Did you confirm payroll? She asked immediately. Yes. How? I smiled slightly. The client payment cleared. Silence on the line. Then Rachel said something quietly. Oh. Victor's eyes narrowed. You're lying. No, I said. I was buying time. Because 10 minutes earlier, while Victor was explaining his offer, another notification had appeared on my phone. The client wire we had been waiting for all week. $180,000. Delayed. But not canceled. I slid the phone across the table so Victor could see it. The bank confirmation screen glowed under the lobby lights. Balance updated. Payroll covered. Victor stared at the screen. For the first time since the meeting began. He looked surprised. "You knew?" he asked. "Not at first. But you suspected?" "Yes." He closed the folder slowly. Then he stood up. "Well," he said calmly. "Congratulations." "Thank you." But before he walked away, Victor paused. "This won't be the last time we talk." I nodded. "I'm sure it won't." He left the lobby without another word. And a few minutes later, 43 employees received their salaries. The company survived the day. But the lesson stayed with me. Because in business, the most dangerous decisions aren't the ones you sign. They're the ones you almost do.